Welcome to Breaking Financial Chains, where we combine practical money guidance with emotional healing to help you break free from financial limitations. I'm Tanya Ibberson, your financial wingwoman. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, Breaking Financial Chains. I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you for choosing to listen to me. I have chosen today's episode to be about my why, to be quite a personal, a personal episode. So hopefully I'm not going to live to regret talking about this, but I think it's really super important that some of the work that I do with some of my clients is really quite traumatic. What has happened around them, what they have experienced, and then it's really, really difficult for them to work through how we put that behind them. You know, how we help them to be able to, or how I help them to be able to move forward, to be able to put those experiences behind them. And I realised while I was, this podcast has been in the planning for 6 months, maybe perhaps a little bit more, 6-8 months. And I realised within all of that in order to be able to generate trust, build trust, to be able to show people that it's safe to share their stories and to start to be open to exploring it themselves, or start to speaking out perhaps if the situation calls for that, is that I need to go first. If I'm asking people to look at themselves, I need to be able to say, it's okay, look, I'm going to do it as well. So that's what this episode is around. So a big part of the the mission, the background to breaking financial chains is a big part of my story, which includes financial control from somebody else. To find yourself in a relationship like that it's not something that you ask for. It's not something that you can always see coming. Certainly my experience, in the experience that I have talked about or worked through with clients is, and also that you read online, you can Google this sort of thing. I'm working on a financial abuse specialist course at the moment, and the summaries, the stories are the same. It didn't start off being controlling. The relationship was not all about my money to begin with. The relationship was not all about controlling me as a person and taking away the freedom that I had. However, that was the outcome. And therefore, hopefully, maybe sharing something like this, maybe talking a little bit more might help one other person to be able to talk a little bit more, and then to be able to say, I can see that what happened to me wasn't my fault, and also to show some people that maybe don't recognise the signs that they have going on around them right now are signs of financial abuse, that they are examples of what's happening to them right now, and they can change that. They can perhaps start to take steps to protect themselves, to arm themselves, to raise awareness, to then maybe reach out and ask for help. So my situation is a long time behind me now, which is I'm very grateful for. But it started off, I was relatively young. I was 20 years of age. I met somebody, fell in love, did all of those things, was completely in awe of this person. And over time, gradually, we moved in together, we relocated along quite a long distance from home. So I grew up in Preston in Lancashire, and I moved down south to a place near Reading in Berkshire. And I found myself quite isolated. It was at that point in my life that I was just starting to come to the end of my accountancy studies. So I'd been working in accountancy practice by that time, since I was 18. So I came straight out of school, didn't go to university, worked in accountancy, got an apprenticeship, did the AAT qualification, and then I went on to study with the ACCA and qualified with them. I moved at a time where I was coming up to do my final exams. So I was very, very busy. So relocated meant a new job, meant I didn't know anybody that was nearby apart from my other half. I was studying. So part of the pressure with studying and working full time meant that those final 3 exams in particular, you had to pass all 3 exams, or you had to resit all 3 exams. I think there was some little caveat that if you scored over a certain amount for 2, you could perhaps retake 1. But essentially, it was a case of, I need to pass these 3 exams or I'm going to have to resit all 3 of these exams again, which I obviously didn't want to do. And I didn't have time for anything else, to be honest. I was working, I was running a home, I was studying, and that was my life. It was pretty full on. And it was sort of, you look back over that time and you think, I was completely isolated. I was moved away from my family. There was maybe some elements and some people within that circle that saw what I had from a distance as oh, how very nice for you. How very nice to be moving to this lovely gated community with a lovely garden and in a very nice part of the world. And, we had cars, we had the holidays, we had all of those nice things. So perhaps there was a little bit of, there's a bit of dislocation as well in a lot of my close relationships at the time, because there was a perception from some people that it wasn't talked about. There were a lot of assumptions made. And because I was busy, because I was working full time in my job, I was working evenings and weekends because that was part of what that job called for at the time. There was some anti-social hours that were required. I was studying, I was revising, I was working up to doing these exams. And once I'd finished, before I'd even got my exam results, I realised I was pregnant, which was a surprise. But life got very, very busy. And that's how it happens, right? That's what happens in life. This is what we have. We move from one thing to the other. The inertia of the journey takes us in a certain direction. And I wouldn't say pressures, but there are certainly outside influences that might steer you in a certain way. And when, certainly in my experience of a controlling relationship, it was very much something that I kind of felt quite grateful for, almost, that certain things didn't fall to my lap. There were certain things I didn't need to deal with. There were certain things I didn't need to worry about because he would take care of that. There were certain things that I didn't need to have on my list to do because he would take care of that. And then over time, that was how the situation changed for me. I'd been moved away. I didn't have many friends to start with, although that did change over time. And then I had a new baby. And my identity changed along with that, as often happens. So to sort of pull that round full circle, I ended up in a situation where my daughter now is 4 years old. She's not that now, she's 21 now, so this is a long time ago, almost 21 in a few months' time. But she was 4 years old. We've moved to a bigger house, which is very nice. I've moved jobs, which is very nice. And my daughter has started school or is just about to start school. And you start to question. I started to question that, what do you mean I can't see my family? What do you mean I can't go back travelling to Preston to spend time with my family, to spend time with friends? I was not allowed, or I was strongly encouraged not to go on nights out, strongly encouraged not to socialise with certain people because he had an opinion of the people that I was spending time with. And as I'd moved into this very, very different job, there was a lot more socialising required. There was relationship building. The business development was a part of the role. And I did start to go to social occasions at work and networking events. Sometimes they were during the day, sometimes they were in the evening, and then there would be social occasions with the people that I work with. So things started to get a little bit more fractured. Things started to get a little bit more pressured. It wasn't not even a little bit more pressure. Things started to get a lot harder at home for me. And we reached a point where I needed to make a decision of what I wanted to do. I had a 4-year-old child who was watching every move that I was making, and we weren't allowed to have a cleaner. This is just like another example. I wasn't allowed to have a cleaner. That was something that was expected of me. For a short time when my daughter started school, because it was a crazy system at the time, she only started for half days. So the first term she was at school in the morning, and then she needed to be collected in the afternoon. And the area where I lived, there weren't many childminders, the nannies, etc., that were available, that had space to look after. So that was another stress. So we did have a nanny for a short time then. So that worked out quite well, and then we shifted again. So once she'd moved to full-time at school, that made things a little bit easier to some extent, and we had childminder, and then we made use of after-school clubs, and there were things that we could do around managing that time for her. But we started to find things quite tricky because it was always an expectation that was something that I would deal with. I would find the new childminder. I would interview the people. I would manage and book and pay for everything that was needed. I would manage the after school club and the breakfast club. And if I needed to get to work at a certain time, then that was my responsibility to sort that. That's something it wasn't a parental responsibility. It was just, it all fell to me. And it was an expectation that was something that I would do. And stemming right back to when my daughter was a baby, I wasn't allowed to get a babysitter because he also used to work evenings and weekends. So the control came in from all different angles within that relationship. And it became very, very difficult for me to branch out, to sort of spread my wings a little bit and actually do and achieve what I wanted to achieve. On top of that, there were things that happened that put me under a lot of strain financially that wasn't particularly evenly split. So we didn't have a joint bank account, for example. We each agreed on different expenses, but it always ended up whereby I ended up with a larger share of the expenses, even though my salary was less. It always ended up whereby he made changes to the financial arrangements we had around mortgages, for example, which meant that he could save money on mortgages. But because I paid for the childcare, that wasn't something that I had any wiggle room with. And add to that, over the years where debt had accumulated because of the situations that I was sort of forced into, it meant that I was very strained from a financial point of view. And I didn't know what else to do. I needed the job that I had at the time to be able to cover all of the expenses that we had, but there was never anything left at the end of the month. There was never anything that I could then start to build up to pay off the debt. There was never anything that I could start to build up to have some sort of a nest egg to be able to help myself, give myself more options. And there were a few times where I had start to have conversations with people and start to notice in myself, oh, okay, this isn't what all relationships are like. This is just what this relationship is like. I talked to friends at work and they would say about how they would put a certain amount of money into the joint account and then all of the bills came out from there. And you start to think, oh, okay, that's not what I do. Or the other way around, people would be paid, all of their money for both sides of the relationship would go into a joint account, and they would each take out a certain amount that they could do what they wanted with, whether that was spending or going out, socialising, or whatever they wanted to do with their money. And again, you start to think, okay, that's interesting. That's not what I have. And over time, I started to ask questions, and I started to maybe not push back, but certainly start to make my opinion known that this isn't what I want my life to be. I want my life to be different to this. And I started to ask questions about what money he was spending. from the family expenses, what he was covering, and how, to attempt to get some level of parity, or to be able to compare and make sure that we were doing things fairly, and that never ever went down very well. And it all came to a head one weekend when I'd gone out for the evening, and I had intended to stay at a friend's house so that I didn't have to leave to get the last train home. But I hadn't told him that that's what I was doing, because I didn't want the argument about the fact that I was wanting to go out and I was wanting to have a late night and I would get back when I get back. So I was going to stay at a friend's house, and I planned to let him know. So, there's an element of culpability there. And maybe I should have had that conversation, but equally I shouldn't have had to have had that conversation. I shouldn't have felt scared to ask permission to spend time with friends. So when I did call to say that I wasn't coming home, I was staying at a friend's house, it got very, very threatening. Needless to say, that escalated quite severely the next day, and the police were called in that situation. And I drew the line at that point. I drew the line in the sand, and I thought, this cannot be the example that I set for my daughter. This cannot be what I show her is something that she should aspire to. If she ends up with somebody, this can't be the example that she believes is acceptable behaviour in a loving relationship. So I started to make changes from that point going on. But throughout all of these things happening over all of these years, so that happened in 2009. We'd been together since the year 2000, so 9 years. My daughter was 4, almost 5 at that point. So, things had changed over that time. And we found ourselves in this situation 9 years on. I never told a soul that was happening to me. I'm being a little bit vague, because I don't want to name who this person is. I don't want, it's not the point really. This is more about sharing the experience that I've been through, but I never told anybody that that's what was happening. I may well have alluded to, I can't come out for some reason, or I can't go here, or I can't go there, or I never invited, or very, very rarely invited anybody back to the house, because he would get quite angry about that. Someone was invading his space, and I needed to ask for permission to be able to bring friends and people back to my home. So there was a huge amount of fear about consequences that would then come out of that. I didn't want people to see how almost subservient I was in some situations. It was my job to run the home. I wasn't allowed to pay for domestic help. It was my job to clean the home. It was my job to make sure that all of the washing was done and there were clean shirts in the wardrobe. It was my job to be primary caregiver to our daughter, and to do everything that she needed and make sure that we replied to party invitations, and that she had a gift to take to those parties, and that she had an outfit for World Book Day, and that she had everything ready she needed for a school trip, and she was dressed appropriately for non-uniform day. And there were times when I get that wrong, clearly, because that happens. So it was the shame of the situation that I was in, so I didn't dare tell anybody, and also the professional risk. So while all of this is going on at home, and I've got myself in the situation where I'm in a huge amount of debt and financially can't leave or do anything to change that situation, by this time I'm a qualified accountant. So by 2005, I've got those letters after my name, and there are certain expectations, and there are stipulations, and there are rules. So, for example, an accountant, you can't come to an arrangement with your creditors. You can't file for bankruptcy, and those are for good reasons. You can't be expected to be trusted with other people's money if you can't look after your own. However, I found myself in this situation whereby it was absolutely partly my doing, but it was also partly in due to a lot of financial and external circumstances that put me in that place. And I didn't feel that I could talk to anybody, because I didn't want them to think differently about me professionally. I didn't want them to think of me as a crap accountant, as an example. So there was a huge amount of professional risk. So I would put my heels on and pick up my fancy bag in my lovely, oh God, I think at that point I was driving a Mitsubishi Lancer. I was in my little boy racer car, like almost put together a rally car. And I had that persona, I had the view, I had everybody seeing a certain side to me that I wanted them to see, because I couldn't dare share the truth of what was going on. And in the end, it was, when everything came to a head that weekend, my daughter was in the room at the time. And she was the motivator for me. I don't think she'll ever realise just how much of a beacon that she became for me at that point. It was, she then became the inspiration. I needed to show strength for her. I needed to show her what freedom could look like, even though that situation was really quite unsettling and scary for her at the same time. We needed to come through that. And now that she's so much older and that I can share more of this with her, she can understand that there was a good reason for it, you know. And she's old enough, she's old enough to see that side of the relationship with her father too. You know, there are things that he continues to do, which I see have been mirrored for the last 25 years, as long as I've known him, to those patterns of behaviour are being repeated. So she can see that. You know, she's an intelligent person. And it sort of brings me to my whole, this is the reason why I do what I do on the financial wing woman side of my business and on the breaking financial chains and my charity. So I have a charity that is called Financial Control to Freedom Project, because essentially no woman should stay in a relationship or a job that they hate because she can't afford to leave. Every woman should have the means and the mindset to walk alone, should she choose. Now, I say women because I'm looking at this from my viewpoint. I'm a woman, and that was the situation, and that was what played out for me. I'm talking to everybody when I say that, though. I'm talking to people that were assigned female at birth, transgender people. I'm talking to however you identify yourself as. People in general find themselves in this situation, and there are ways out of it. So whilst I don't want to rule out anyone other than women by saying women, I say that because that's my history. But this applies to anybody. The tools and things that I'm going to talk about and share with you apply to lots of people. The experiences that I've had aren't exclusively happening to just women. They happen to men as well. I'm not excluding anybody. I'm not belittling anybody's experience. But this is the very heart of the mission of what I want to share, and this is why I want to share it. This is why I've established this charity. So we have this. I work with two sort of large types of people, predominantly women. I have my accountancy practice as well, and interestingly, most of those clients are men. But on the coaching side and on the charity side of the business, I work with women who have money, who have means, but find themselves going along with the inertia of what life has thrown at them, and they found themselves in a position, and sometimes you can freeze time. You know, like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, when she used to like put the fingers together and freeze time. If you could just do that and look around and ask yourselves, is this actually the life that I want? I am busy, I am driven, I am motivated, but am I doing actually what I want? So I work with women that are at that point who have means and perhaps financial overwhelm, that they have so much on their to-do list and so much on their plate that they don't know if they're doing what they want to do. They don't really know how they've got where they've got, but they have financial resources to call upon, and they want to do good. You know, they want to be able to do more, to give back. They want to be able to leave a legacy for their children. And then we've got the other type of client that I work with that doesn't have that stability, doesn't have that foundation, who very much feels that they've got no way out, feels that their mindset has got them in a place where we almost accept our lot. And that was me to some extent. Back in some age 18, 20, that very much was me. I was very, very grateful for the opportunities and the situations that I found myself in, they were all learning points. They were all learning curves for me. I went to a private school with a full bursary. I've been exposed to both sides of the tracks, if you like, and I help both types of women. I don't want the financial aspects, the fact that people can't afford to pay for that help, to be a reason why I can't help those people. So again, this is another reason why I've started to do this podcast, to start to talk about things like this, to be able to share my story and my journey and show you that there is a way out. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what those circumstances and those scenarios are. You can choose a different path at any point, even though that might feel impossible, even though that might feel like something that doesn't happen to people like me. It does. I promise. It absolutely does. So that's, I guess that's an abridged version of my why and my story. Mindset, I think, is a huge piece of what helps keep us stuck in a situation. Money mindset is a comment that's bandied around a lot. It's used very, very loosely. It's trendy. It's being it's over talked about almost. But certainly from the viewpoint of the work that I do, it's the mindset piece. It's the stories that we tell ourselves. It's the psychology of how we've ended up where we've ended up, which includes things like epigenetics, generational cycles that we've carried with us, our upbringing, and being disadvantaged as women in particular. Again, we're going back to that women thread. It's only fairly recently that women were able to have their own bank account and were able to borrow money to buy property, etc. So we very much are on the back foot. But it's the mindset piece that we can start to make those changes. We can start to be that cycle breaker. And it was something that I very much felt I had no choice to do if I wanted to remain in the profession that I worked in. And it's not lost on me that my former partner knew that. He knew that was the situation that I was in. So there we go. Thank you so much for listening. I would love to hear any stories that you want to share. If there's anything that this episode has brought up for you, please do, by all means, reach out. Ask questions. If there's anything you'd like me to talk about, please do also let me know. And I would gently encourage you, as a result of listening to this podcast, to think for yourselves, if there's one money memory that you're afraid to say out loud, what one thing might there be that you could perhaps reframe, or that you could perhaps pinpoint was a turning point within your lives, so that you could maybe do some work now to look upon that differently. Until next time. Thank you for joining me today on Breaking Financial Chains. Remember, you have the power to transform your relationship with money one step at a time. If this episode helped you, please subscribe and leave a review to help others find their path to financial freedom. I'm Tanya, your financial wing woman, and I'll see you next week.